Salutations, ghouls and freaks. Welcome to this podcast, The Storm, where insane slashers, undead blood drinkers, and all around crooked beans convene to talk and debate all things pop culture. With me, as always, is my co host, the Mage of Madness, aka the Authenticator, Dalton L. Mortimer.
Good evening, everybody.
And I am your host / Scarecrow impersonator, the Brainstormer Pop Culture. How's everyone doing tonight? I'm going to assume everyone is fine. But yes, so first off, I do want to apologize that we did not do this last night because I had certain kind of health issues that prevented me from doing so. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Hello?
Okay. Discord broke immediately after you finished the intro, apparently.
Well, EMS wanted to just inform the audience about why we didn't do this last night.
Yeah.
I'm feeling much better now. Pretty much. So that's good. So let me pull up the new. So we're going to be finishing, hopefully, the video that Renee Cut had done last week. We were doing last week, so we're trying to finish that up.
Mm-hmm. I believe we had ended just after the implication that people can be racist without realizing it, and that's still bad because reasons.
Yes. I already have
How has anything whatsoever to do with mental illness or with horror movies?
Yeah, just him being a weird, inferring about something really stupid, pretty much.
Yep. He has a one-size-fits-all worldview, and it needs to be jammed into every conceivable nook and cranny of it.
Right. So this video is Maniacs and Psychos: Mental Illness in Horror Movies by Renegade Cut. As we said, if you want to see the first half of this video, please go check out last week's podcast. But yeah, so shall we? I believe it's Jack-o'-lantern.
We shall Jack-o'-lantern, indeed.
Actually, let me see about the volume here. Just make sure it's up and okay. All right, shall we? Jack-o'-lantern.
Jack-o'-lantern.
About his reformation can be dismissed. In Psycho 3, Bates continues his rampage, sometimes hounded by people who suspect him and sometimes protected by those he has won over. The problem is that while the film sympathizes with Bates, it also shows that those who accept him were naive. The ready-made counter to all of this would be someone saying, well, would you want to work in the same diner as a Norman Bates? But that is not the point. The point is that the mentally ill are not Norman Bates.
You just completely undermined your entire premise of your video. If your base assumption, Leon, is that the Maniacs and Psychos of horror movies are society's commentary or presupposition or prescription for what we define the mentally ill to be, and then you yourself, halfway through said argument, just up and admit that the mentally ill are not and have never been meant to be analogous to someone like Norman Bates under normal circumstances, then how in 99 flavors of fuck do you not immediately stop the video there and think to yourself, okay, what the fuck am I doing? I've just undermined my entire premise with this envision. And if you had that, light bulb moment of self-awareness, why did you just not make a different kind of video? You could have made this video about literally anything vaguely Halloween related, and I'm sure your audience would have been fine with it. And we wouldn't need to be beating our heads against the metaphorical brick wall of, oh my god, is he serious right now? But you apparently, halfway through your own argument, just dismiss your entire argument. I don't know why you would do this thing, but I suspect you're going to explain it, and I'm going to be even more confused. Jack-o'-lanterns.
Moment. Okay. Jack-o'-lanterns.
It is statistically far more likely for someone who is mentally ill to be the victim of a crime than to be the perpetrator of a crime. In fact, it is statistically more likely for someone who is mentally ill to be the victim of a crime than the general population. According to mental illness policy, individuals with severe psychiatric disorders who were not taking medication were found to be 2.7 times.
Yeah, sorry, I again just have to.
And again, yes, Leon, that is true. Meaning that the percentage of mentally ill people to which horror movies are alluding or deferring are a tiny, tiny, tiny micro subsection of those who suffer from mental health disorders. So, pray tell, in light of this fact, why in 99 flavors of fuck, once again, did you make a video about how horror movies are meant to be the broad brush with which society paints all mentally ill people? Because you just conceded that statistically and in actuality, the percentage of people with mental health disorders who commit violent acts are negligible to, vanishingly, irrelevant under most cases. The problem that you have, Leon, is that those people who are predisposed to commit violent acts while having a mental illness do so disproportionately that it becomes noteworthy on a grand scale. I.e., the reason why we have characters like Michael Myers, Leatherface, Norman Bates, and the like is because while there may be very, very few people with mental illnesses who commit violent acts, the ones that do so in such a flamboyant and grandiose fashion that we are almost compelled by both, the nature of the circumstances and also our own morbid fascination, because human nature, to talk about it.
Right.
Did it ever occur to you, in the light of this, Leon, that is why we make such characters the center of horror movies? And I do need to remind you that this is horror movies we're talking about. The reason why the people with mental health disorders in horror movies are not peaceful is because the very premise of horror movies is something horrible going on. They're the same root word, you see. Moving on.
Right. I'm not really going to be of much help here until he actually gets into the slashers. Then I'll have words to say. Okay. Jack-o'-lanterns?
And in the spirit of getting there, Jack-o'-lanterns.
Jack-o'-lanterns.
Disorders who were not taking medication were found to be 2.7 times more likely to be the victim of a violent crime than the general population. Again, we see this in Psycho 2, as Bates is the victim of an elaborate plot, but the films also show him to be far more likely to be the perpetrator. In Psycho 4, Bates is convinced that his pregnant wife will give birth to someone like himself.
Scientists have proven that the underlying...
Okay. Yes, Leon, you're talking about a single case. In all of the Psycho movies, the focus is one individual. That one individual being Norman Bates. Therefore, if he previously was predisposed towards committing violent acts, as we see in Psycho 1, it's reasonable to assume that, at least on some level, he is likely to do so again. But that doesn't mean that we can't have sympathy for him, as we see in Psycho 2, because he is actively trying to disassociate from that part of himself. He's actively trying to repress that part of himself, or he's been, cured, for lack of a better term, with, very, very thorough psychological therapy. But because people who are quote-unquote normal distrust people with violent pasts, or, morally ambiguous pasts, as you described in the previous segment of this video, it was in fact the paranoia of ostensibly normal people that brought the darkness back out of Norman. And given that he himself was abused by his mother in the mythos of the Psycho universe, it's kind of natural for him to wonder, oh my god, how the fuck am I going to be a father? And what if the issue we have as a family is genetic rather than socialized? So, yes, while his reaction of being, a murderous psycho, as per the title of this franchise, is probably unreasonable, the worries of, oh my god, how am I going to parent? And also, what if there's nothing I can do and the person ends up being crazy anyway, are at least rational, if somewhat hysterical, fears. Moving on.
Okay. Yeah, Jack O'Lanterns.
Jack-o'-lanterns.
Pregnant wife will give birth to someone like himself.
Scientists have proven that the underlying cause for my kind of insanity is genetic, but she just doesn't buy it.
This acknowledgement of the genetic component of mental illness may seem purely like sympathy for the mentally ill, because it concludes that it is not their fault that they are suffering from their illness, but it also produces misconceptions about...
Sorry,
You're doing it again, Leon. The movie is going out of its way to be as sympathetic as possible to a character who is the main villain in a horror franchise, and you're still finding a way to spin it so that it's bad. Pray tell, what exactly do you want these horror movies to do? Do you want the people with mental health issues in a horror movie, for example, to be the good guys in the horror movie? Would you like a horror movie in which entirely ostensibly sane people go on murderous rampages of mentally ill people because, I don't know, some kind of institutionalized prejudice against mentally ill people? Would you be in favor of that horror movie? Well, the problem with that, okay, Leon, is generally speaking, if anyone is committing mass or systematic murdering of other people, we consider that to be mentally ill, regardless of the cause. Unless they have been massively aggrieved in some way, or believe that they've been massively aggrieved, it is insane for anyone, no matter how otherwise sane they might be, to go on mass murdering sprees. Therefore, you run into the problem of, even if you want the movie and the audience to believe that the people committing the crime are sane, the minute they start mass murdering people, they are kind of insane by definition, because that's kind of how our standards for insanity work. Generally speaking, you go on massive destructive rampages, and we somehow come to the conclusion, Leon, there might be something wrong with you in the head. Because generally speaking, sane human beings don't go on massive fucking murder spree. And even if you could somehow manage to make that premise work, that premise I just laid out, where, you know, sane people have a prejudice against mentally ill people and go on killing them, it would be extremely hackneyed and forced because it enforces a oppressor-oppressed dynamic, which people, generally speaking, do not see reflected, or see reflected very, very, very narrowly in their lives. And therefore, it becoming the overarching infrastructure of a movie plot is very, very forced. Because you're drawing disproportionate attention to something that is otherwise not present in a large enough degree for it to be noticeable. Jack-o'-lantern.
Jack-o'-lantern.
The genetic component and about inevitability of behavior. While there is a genetic component to mental illness, it is not the only component. Furthermore, it would be a mistake to view criminality in general as exclusively the result of mental illness, and it would also be a mistake to view criminality as inevitable for someone who has a mental illness.
Again, yes. But again, even in the Psycho franchise, such as we have it, regardless of whether a portion of Norman's pathology is genetic or not, we do know for a fact that his mother was abusive. So you could make the argument that Norman is overreacting to the genetic aspect of his disorder, possibly. But here's the thing. Not everyone who is abused goes on to abuse in those kind of situations. You can come from a dark background and not follow in your parents' footsteps. But a disproportionate number of the people who are abusive were themselves abused. And if you grew up in a lifestyle where you don't know what love is because proper love was never shown to you, you might be worried that you won't be able to properly show your offspring love when they show up. So you could, if you want to be charitable to Norman, in this case, Leon, make the argument that he's not simply worried about the genetic aspect, although he's clearly worried about that, but he might also be worried about his own ability to be a proper and constructive father figure, because his only exposure to the concept of love was his mother, who fucked his head up horribly. So you could make the argument that he's both concerned about the genetic aspect of his disorder and also his own capacity to not send that on if he has a child. Because let me tell you, I have no massive outstanding mental issues, and I still worry about whether I'd be a good father, just because my own father was extremely distant growing up, and my step parents were, when I had them, weren't much better. So even I still worry about that. I can't imagine what it would be like if I was equivalent to Norman fucking Bates and had to deal with the fact that, oh, by the way, you're going to have a child one day. Try not to fuck it up horribly. Bye. That's horrifying to anyone, but I can't see how you can miss that subtext. I mean, it's not blatant, but again, being intellectually charitable, it's one of those things that would be obvious to anyone who has a thorough understanding of human nature. Jack-o'-lanterns.
Yeah, one sec. Alright. Jack-o'-lanterns.
Although much of this misconception comes from disproved age-old quackery like phrenology and eugenics, this stigma still exists in the popular consciousness today. This so-called incurability of the mentally ill and this inevitability of violent criminal behavior is portrayed in the 1978 film Halloween. Early in the film, Michael Myers
Okay, so I'm sure you have something to say, Don. May I? May I start off?
You may go ahead.
Okay. So, I don't want to say anything that would make me seem very kind of petty, but he has to understand that, for one thing, the point of Halloween, like the point of Michael Myers, is I don't think he's mentally ill. I think he's just in terms of like the version of this slasher, which became more of the archetypal slasher in the genre. Michael Myers, or the Shape as he was known, like it's even listed in the title, in the end credits, the Shape.
Yeah.
He is the embodiment of.
He doesn't suffer from any particular mental health symptoms. He's just a force of nature, for the most part, I think. That's what you're getting.
I was getting there, but thank you for. Yeah, no, but and that's the thing. What I'm trying to say is that these slashers, like Michael Myers, like Jason Voorhees, like Freddy Krueger, they're not, to our limited human understanding, we try to classify them in terms of human understanding, but maybe they can't be understood because they are just a purest embodiment that we cannot fathom that a human being can do these things. So we try to put labels on them to make us feel more comfortable with them. And again, I'm talking in terms of the movie. But I don't think... I think you're... Leon, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Mr. Leon, I think you are wrong based on the fact that Michael Myers just does the things because he can. It's like what Alfred said in The Dark Knight. Some men just want to watch the world burn. And I think that's what Michael Myers is. He's not mentally ill officially. I think he's just pure evil. But people around him, ordinary people, try to classify him as mentally ill. But
because we would rather live in a world that makes sense than a world that's just outright callous, cruel, and indifferent.
Yeah. Thank you, Don.
My main issue with classifying a Michael Myers or a Jason Voorhees as mentally ill is we don't really see enough of their the thing with the difference between someone like Norman Bates and someone like Michael Myers or Jason Voorhees is Norman Bates is still demonstrably human. Like, he functions as a human being. We see symptoms, we see, mood swings or identity dissociation in the moments where he adopts sort of his mother's guise as a split personality and whatnot. Like, Norman Bates has symptoms. Michael Myers, apart from the obvious, killing, and Jason Voorhees, apart from the obvious killing, they don't have an expanded psychology that you can play diagnostic. Like, there's not enough data there to work with Michael Myers or Jason Voorhees to give them a diagnosis. With Norman, you could go complex post-traumatic stress disorder. You could go sadistic psychopathy. You could go extreme disassociation brought about by severe trauma, etc., etc. You could go brain damage, so on and so forth. with Michael Myers and Jason Voorhees, apart from the act of killing, there's not really a psychology there to be diagnosed. Period. They're just blank canvases on which the darkness of human nature has been painted. And that both makes them more terrifying than Norman Bates could ever be, but also if you're looking at things through a psychological lens, it really gives you nothing to work with. And honestly, you could probably make a pretty decent critique of slasher movies when they do that, when they make a character who is just a blank psychological slate and there is no mind there to be had. I wouldn't, because quite frankly, I find it more interesting when the forces at play are more like forces of nature than psychological profiles. But if psychological profiles are what you look for in your antagonist, then you're shit out of luck. There isn't one. I don't even think we get a speculated diagnosis for Michael in any of the original Halloween movies. They might have tried in the Rob Zombie ones, I don't remember, but I don't think we get even a speculated diagnosis. But Brainstorm might know better than me, because slashers are his shit.
No, I don't think even in the original Halloween, because Dr. Loomis described him as pure evil more than anything else. Like a full-blown psychologist described one of his patients as just pure evil.
Yeah, which, if you're applying real-world psychological standards, that's probably malpractice, because you're supposed to operate on the assumption that no one is truly, truly evil. There's always a psychological impetus or something, or maybe a brain malformation, but yeah, that's the thing. If the only thing a trained psychologist can come up with is, nope, you're just evil, then mayhaps there just isn't a mental illness here to be had. Maybe it's just, the force of darkness itself become incarnate. Jack-o'-lanterns.
Jack-o'-lanterns.
Violent criminal behavior is portrayed in the 1978 film Halloween. Early in the film, Michael Myers murders his sister for reasons known only to himself. Years later, Dr. Sam Loomis and Marion, a nurse, drive to the mental institution for a patient transfer. Marion asks Dr. Loomis if he has any special instructions, and Loomis, Myers' psychiatrist, warns Marion only to not underestimate Myers' potential for violence.
Yeah, because the dude killed his sister. Possibly could kill anyone else.
And clearly Dr. Loomis has worked extensively with Michael. He's tried all of the possible diagnoses. I'm sure he's tried schizophrenia, he's tried sadism, he's tried psychopathy, and none of the shit applied is the thing. That's what the implication, I think, is supposed to be. The implication is a psychologist went into the head of Michael Myers, looked around for 20 years, and was like, I got nothing.
Yeah.
And again, by real world psychological standards, you could probably make the argument of bias or malpractice on Loomis's part. But for the sake of the movie, I think that's supposed to establish that this isn't the mental patient you're looking for. There's not some, quick and easy medication or talk therapy that's going to bring out a sane and rational human being to Michael Myers. It's ironically, and I think it might be deliberate on the film's part, he's just a mask.
Yeah. Damn, I had something, but I lost my train of thought.
Sorry.
No. It's my fault. I was doing other things and I forgot about it. It'll come back to me, but it'll come back to me. Let's just move on.
Jack-o'-lanterns.
Jack-o'-lanterns.
Marion responds that she would prefer to call Myers it instead of him, revealing a common dehumanizing attitude toward the mentally ill.
Oh my! I'm sorry. I have to pause there. Just okay. Now I remember.
Okay.
Now I remember. Now I remember. I'm sorry, Don.
No, go ahead.
One thing. Yeah, no. I thought it was Loomis who said call him it instead of him, but it's been a while since I've seen Halloween. But what I was going to say was these slashers, like Michael Myers and Jason Voorhees, the masked ones, the ones that really don't have an actual personality, are just kind of blank slates, an embodiment of the primal evil, right?
Mhm.
They are most clearly of the shadow archetype, where it's just a creature of pure death, destruction, and chaos.
Mhm.
And granted, the shadow archetype has many different forms, like Freddy Krueger, like the Joker, but the slasher, specifically the classical slasher who just have again blank slate, they are just primal. They are the most primal of them. They're more like animals than they are people. Because they rely more on their baser instincts than anything else. I mean, sure, some of them, like Michael Myers, does have a flair for dramatics. But, I mean, the headstone thing
Oh, wow.
and the stringing of bodies around a house and how he methodically stalks his targets, appearing and reappearing and just waiting for the right moment in the shadows.
Mhm.
I'm just saying, like, he has a flair of dramatics,
Mhm.
but it's rare. And again, I'm just saying, like, they're the embodiment of the shadow archetype, and more often than not, the shadow is just the representation of the most darkest evil impulses of man in general.
Yeah, everything that can't be in the light, hence the shadow.
Yeah. So it's not dehumanizing, because that's technically what Michael Myers is, an it, the other.
And again, this is after he's been in Loomis's care for 20 years or so, and again, my presumption, and it might just be because I want to give the movie as much benefit of the doubt as I can before it starts, so that it can hang itself or not on its own merit. But my assumption with the Halloween franchise has always been Dr. Loomis would love to diagnose Michael as simply a sociopath or simply a sadist or what have you. But the way I've always interpreted the Halloween franchise is he's tried to apply all these various different labels, these various different diagnoses, and it's come up to nothing. He's had all of he's basically thrown the entire diagnostic and statistical manual at Michael Myers, and nothing is stuck. So at this point, he's just like, I got nothing. I know he probably even in universe knows it's tantamount to malpractice and bias and shit. But he's tried everything he could possibly try to diagnose Michael with, and either he doesn't have anything that's ever been on record before, or he has such a kaleidoscope of comorbid and overlapping syndromes that they just don't know what the fuck he is. And again, in the real world, they would probably try to come up with some kind of new diagnosis. It would probably colloquially just be called the Michael Myers syndrome. But in universe, this is just Dr. Loomis being like, I am not qualified for this. I got saddled with this case. I don't know what it is. I don't know why it is. Just, I got nothing. That's him trying his damnedest and giving up, in my opinion.
Jack O'Lantern?
How do we... Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Jack O'Lantern. She remarks that what bothers her the most about the mentally ill is their gibberish, her word, again highlighting the dehumanization of the mentally ill. Myers soon escapes from the mental institution to terrorize the suburbs. Dr. Loomis, who had been keeping an eye on Myers for years, believes him to be incurable. Loomis states that he spent years trying to reach Myers, but after years of failing, he concluded that Myers need not be helped, only contained for the rest of his life.
Okay, so so while you were writing this part of the script or filming this part of the video, you were in fact aware that Loomis had tried everything and at this point was just like, I got nothing. So why are you judging him for referring to Michael as an it? Because, okay, here is the very crux of this issue. Pick a definition of what it is to be human. Just any definition of what it is to be human. Now, imagine you find yourself face to face with a entity, with a person, with a humanoid-looking being who fits none of your definitions of what it is to be human. No empathy, no cognition, no, higher functions, none of that. Would it be unreasonable at that point to call that person an it? Especially given that they're not morally neutral. Because I could see your argument if this were just a person in a coma or a person with severe, cognitive retardation, with severe cognitive deficits, like a vegetable who just couldn't move. If someone called that person an it, I would feel a little squigged out too. But in addition to all of that, what we see in Michael Myers' case is a predisposition towards homicidal and often mass homicidal violence. So he doesn't even have the moral agency to be qualified as a human being, and in fact, he directly counteracts that and actively seeks to counteract that. Because again, you could make the argument in some cases that maybe he kills people without realizing what he's doing. And that would also be a reason not to call him an it. But as far as we know, the only thing that Michael Myers understands is that he is killing people and that for some reason is fun or satisfies him in some way. So he has none of the hallmarks of humanity and several of the hallmarks of the opposite of humanity. And again, even in universe, Dr. Loomis said he basically tried to throw the entire diagnostic and statistical manual at Michael and nothing stuck for 20 years. So again, we're left with the solution of I got nothing, and this entity is clearly dangerous, so clearly it needs to be contained by someone. So yeah, again, in a real world context, you could make the argument of malpractice and you can make the argument of bias, but in a movie context, it's perfectly reasonable for him to just be like, given that I've got nothing that can help this person, and given that he doesn't have any of the aspect of human psychology that qualifies him as a person, what the fuck am I supposed to do?
I also feel like it's relevant to mention that the movie takes place in 1978, and Michael Myers, I believe, has been, yeah, you said 20 years, correct? So about 1958.
Well, I was just I was just throwing out a random number of years. I don't know how long he was in the mental institution for. I would assume
15. No, it
for
was
most
it was
of-
like 15 or 16 years.
I was gonna say because he was a little kid when he killed his family, and he was in his like mid-20s, I think, when the first movie happened. So yeah, somewhere in there.
So what I was gonna say was I believe treatment of mental health back then
Mhm.
for that time wasn't the best.
No.
I believe it was better than like 1930s, 40s, and 50s.
Yeah.
Mental aid. Possibly 60s. I'm not entirely sure about the 60s. But more often than not, they just kind of shuffled those with mental illnesses away from general populace. You know, it was kind of a whole out of sight, out of mind thing. I'm not saying it was right. I'm just saying this as a fact, and then how that was how mental care was back then.
Yep. And also keep in mind that we're still, in this day and age, discovering new shit about mental health. Like, there's still an unexplored country in our freaking head as far as psychology as a science is concerned. So even if Michael Myers in this hypothetical would have benefited from some kind of medication or some kind of new therapy that we now know of that they didn't know of back in 1978, even if that were the case, they only had the resources of 1978. And that sucks because the past kind of sucks, unfortunately, relative to now. In some ways. In some ways, I think the past had some shit figured out, but that's a different conversation for today.
Yeah.
Jack-o'-lanterns.
Jack-o'-lanterns.
Loomis, a psychiatrist, concludes that Myers is a devil, so he arms himself and patrols Haddonfield, Illinois like a vigilante more than a doctor. The audience is given the impression that the mentally ill are not to be cured, but to be controlled. Again, the common retort to all of this would be, well, would you want Michael Myers rampaging around your town? But that is not the point.
Okay, Leon, you just, like, 2 minutes ago, got done explaining to us, after Brainstormer and I kind of cut you to the quick and assumed it, that Loomis has tried basically everything to reach Michael when he was first incarcerated in the mental institution. And every last thing he tried came with nothing. So it's not that every person with mental illness needs to be locked up and needs to not be cured and needs to not be treated and what have you. But if you work with a patient for 20 years with exclusive access to them and have all of the most, latest and greatest psychology at your disposal and all of the, latest and greatest in psychiatry at your disposal, and you come up with nothing, again, I ask, what in this hypothetical are you supposed to do? You've tried everything and nothing is working, and this person is clearly a danger to themselves and others. At that point, it is reasonable to try to curtail and contain as much as possible the person in question. And again, I must point out that Michael Myers is not meant to, even in his own universe, supposed to be a standard case of mental illness. Otherwise, there wouldn't have been 20 years or 15 years or what have you of shit to try on Michael before it didn't work in the first place. If Michael's If the conduct used with Michael was standard, that would have just been what he would have used to begin with. He clearly spent a good decade or so trying everything he could, and it didn't work. So even in his own universe, Michael is the exception. Please stop trying to project something that even the movie admits is a very, very rare exception onto mental health as a whole. Dumbass. Jack-o'-lanterns.
Give me a second. I'm rubbing my eyes. Trying to stay awake.
Mhm.
If it's any consolation, we got about 6 minutes and 40 seconds left.
Oh, God.
Yeah, so, Chuck Lines?
Jack-o'-lanterns.
Much like Norman Bates, the mentally ill are not Michael Myers. According to Anthony Carlton Cook, author of Moral Panics, Mental Illness Stigma, and the Deinstitutionalization Movement in Popular Culture, Loomis's allusion to Myers' mental illness as a physical manifestation of pure evil does not read as melodrama in the film. For instance, Loomis and Brackett come upon a mutilated, partially eaten animal. Neither the doctor nor the sheriff knows for certain how it arrived there. Loomis, certain that Myers isn't a man, hints at Myers as the culprit.
Okay. I had something, but I forgot it. Damn it.
Okay. And then while you're trying to remember that, Leon, once again, no one claimed that Michael Myers or Norman Bates or Jason Voorhees or anyone was the standard for mental illness, was an uncommon portrayal of a person with mental illness. No one has claimed that. However, that is the premise of your video. Your video is essentially horror movies have something important to teach us about how we portray people with mental illnesses in pop culture and yada yada yada, and this is a problem somehow because reasons. That's basically your premise of this video. And then, after ejaculating all of this abstract pseudo-academic woo, you yourself admit that characters like Norman Bates and Michael Myers are not meant to be trails of all of mental health or mental disorder kind. So then, I must ask, why did you continue making the video beyond this point? If you yourself believe, rightly, I might add, that Michael Myers and Jason Voorhees and Norman Bates are not meant to be portrayals of all mental disorder kind, or shouldn't be, then why do you assume that society writ large believes that these portrayals apply to every single person with a mental disorder ever? Given, especially in the modern era, when diagnoses of depression, anxiety, ADD, obsessive compulsive disorder, cluster P, etc., are at record highs, not because people in general have it more often, but because we're better at diagnosing it than we've ever been, mostly. Why, in such a world as that, would large amounts of people assume that was how mental health issues work? Why are you assuming that the lowly peasantry, the populace, the unwashed masses are so stupid that they believe that a Michael Myers or a Norman Bates is super, super common among people with mental health disorders, so much they would conflate every mental health disorder with those people or those characters, while simultaneously vehemently saying in your own head, these characters aren't and shouldn't be the bog standard for mental health disorder. Why do you, in your own head, acknowledge that these characters are not meant to be any such thing, and then assume that Joe Public is so stupid they can't come to the same conclusion you did. It's extremely elitist, you must understand. That's my main issue here. You assume that you are so much smarter than everyone else that you need to condescendingly explain to them what is blatantly obvious to anyone who's smart enough to be watching this kind of movie in the first place. This is why there's an age restriction on these kinds of movies. Because if I showed this to a toddler, they might be, naive enough to assume that that was how all people with mental illness work. But if you're of a reasonable age to be watching these kind of movies, you probably already come to the conclusion that such characters, if they existed in real life, would be the vast, vast, vast exception. Jack-o'-lanterns.
Jack-o'-lantern. Oh, by the way, yeah, what I was thinking of was what you were basically just saying right now.
Yeah. He simultaneously creates a video about how these characters are portrayed as common among people with mental health issues, and then at least twice now in the video goes, but that's irrelevant because these aren't supposed to be people with mental health. These aren't supposed to depict every person with mental health issues. And yet he proceeds to go ahead and make the video anyway, as though other people haven't come to that same conclusion already.
Right. Shall we?
Yeah, I don't. It's the hypocrisy and the elitism and the failure to think in terms of basic logic that baffles me with these people. Jack-o'-lanterns.
Jack-o'-lanterns.
No definitive proof exists, yet within the narrative of Halloween, the proof is self-evident. Loomis abuses his position and his expertise to push Brackett to accept the idea of Myers' inevitable predilection for violence.
Okay.
Again, this is a person who has studied Michael for 20 years, roughly, give or take. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that, damn it. Michael killed his sister as a child, assaulted a nurse and stole a car, killed a man for his jumpsuit, killed teenagers on three separate occasions. So the predilection for violence is definitive proof. I mean, granted, yes, he does say it doesn't exist yet within the narrative of Halloween, but by the time that scene happens, he has already killed or injured several people.
Yeah, if this were a legal case, we would be referring to that as reasonable doubt, especially given that this, and again, using my legal case metaphor, this would be coming from an expert witness, i.e. Dr. Loomis, who knows the person intimately because he's worked with him for almost 20 years exclusively, and who has tried and failed to make any other mental health diagnosis stick to him. So, yeah, if we're going by like a reasonable doubt standard or a like psychological standards and practice standard, the worst case you could make is malpractice with Loomis and maybe bias. But within the context of the movie and the fact that every other mental health diagnosis he could conceivably think of didn't apply to Michael. And he's an evident threat to people and their safety. He's probably not unreasonable to go, you should be very, very cautious with this person. This person is very clearly a threat to himself and or others. Like, even in real-world psychology, the doctor-patient confidentiality rules, which are almost sacred in the medical field, there's a loophole and an exception to that in cases where you feel the patient is likely to harm themselves or others. And in Michael's case, we've seen very evidently so far that he basically only has the intent to harm himself or others. Duh. Jack-o'-lanterns.
Jack-o'-lanterns.
Myers' origins become more muddled and supernatural in later films, but by the 2018 reboot that retcons these sequels, Myers is once again simply a man with a mental illness who is incapable of being cured, unwilling or unable to control his violent tendencies, and so dangerous that he cannot be contained, even in his advancing age. Although horror films, on average, began to treat mental illness differently as time went on, the 2018 film required a return to the original premise of the 1978 film. It does, however, examine post-traumatic stress disorder with greater care and sympathy, in this case, the one suffering being Halloween protagonist Laurie Strode.
Okay, so in the very example you yourself just cited, we have an example as to why Michael is most definitely not the standard bearer for mental health issues. He's not the character we're supposed to link all other people suffering mental health issues with, because Laurie has post-traumatic stress disorder, probably complex post-traumatic stress disorder, which is a slightly different diagnosis, if we're being entirely honest. And she is portrayed sympathetically. So, from this, we can conclude, based on all of the other evidence in the franchise, including the, supernatural Deus Ex Machinas, for the sake of this argument, that Michael is a very rare exception, which might explain why it took Professor Loomis, or Dr. Loomis, 20 years to rifle through the entire DSM and go, yeah, I got nothing. No diagnosis sticks to this person. This person has a completely unforeseen or unheard of pathology that cannot be rationalized and also needs to be contained for the sake of preventing this person from harming others. And towards the beginning of this section of the video, Brainstormer and I went through a lengthy diatribe about how, if we're being entirely honest, Michael doesn't have a mental health disorder. What he has is an inner darkness that has nothing to do with his psychology. That just sort of comes up inextricably because movie. Which, again, you could chalk up to bad writing, or you could chalk up to Michael simply being a force of nature akin to someone like Jason Voorhees. Moving forward, Jack-o'-lantern.
Jack-o'-lanterns.
Her family does not take her concerns seriously and has largely disconnected from her, an unfortunately common occurrence for someone suffering from a serious psychological disorder. Slasher films in particular have a long history of their antagonist being either mentally ill in the maniac Hollywood sense. Billy from the 1974 film Black Christmas is only implied to be mentally ill, but later given the escaped from the asylum backstory in the 2006 remake. Pamela Voorhees from the 1980 film Friday the 13th suffers from auditory hallucinations.
Okay, but with Pamela, that's mainly just she isn't able to really get over her grief. She's consumed by it. I don't really think that counts as mentally ill.
Well, to give Leon some credit here, his claim isn't that her failure to get over her grief means she has a mental health disorder. It's the fact that she suffers from auditory hallucinations that is mental health disorder, which is fair. It's that, schizophrenia, delusional disorder, lots of other mental health diagnoses have auditory hallucinations. So, yeah.
Okay. But still, I still think he's reaching, is the thing.
Oh, yeah, no question. He's reaching. Because, again, he himself knows that Michael Myers and Jason Voorhees and the like are not common or alluded to be common examples of mental health defects, but he's still going to go on the assumption that these movies either unintentionally or intentionally meant for these characters to be the standards for mental health disorder, even though we see other characters with mental health issues, like Laurie, for example, treated perfectly well and not treated like sociopaths. And just for the record, the main reason why Laurie's family disowns her or disassociates from her in 2018's Halloween is because she has become obsessed with Michael and or taking revenge on him. It has nothing to do with the fact that she's hurting or injured or mentally ill that drives them away. It's the fact of her behavior as a result of those things that drives them away. And unfortunately, people like being in the company of people who they like the company of. And when a person is obsessive or violent or angry all the time, it makes them less good company. And so people are likely to disassociate, especially if they know the person can't control this impulse and there's no likelihood of them getting better anytime soon. It's similar to the reason why some people, when their parents get diagnosed with dementia, break contact with their parents because they simply can't deal with seeing a person that they love or a person that they care for slowly mentally unravel, because it's jarring and horrifying to see a person that you loved, a person that you respected, a person that you grew up with or have a personal connection with slowly lose their grip on reality. And you can make the argument that it's a shitty thing to do to somebody to leave them all alone like that, but it's equally a shitty thing to force someone to stand by someone while they slowly unravel, especially when they can't focus on the person that's trying to help them in any way whatsoever. Like, if your parent couldn't even remember you anymore, for example, and didn't benefit from you being by their side, and all you did was suffer seeing them unravel, wouldn't you, at some point, just go, there's nothing I can do, and this is only hurting me? Like, as shitty as it is to leave someone to die alone, better that than watch them slowly and surely unravel. And that got dark again.
So, Jack-o'-lanterns?
Mm-hmm.
Billy Chapman from the 1984 Silent Night, Deadly Night is also portrayed as mentally ill, having suffered severe psychological trauma in his youth that has persisted into his adulthood. Portrayals of mental illness in horror have changed over time. In the Halloween reboot movies directed by Rob Zombie, Michael Myers is given a backstory, even sympathy. This might seem anathema to fans of the original movies, but it's also an inevitable consequence of changing ideas about the mentally ill.
Okay, for one thing, the Rob Zombie movies do kind of suck from a writing standpoint, is what I'm saying.
But Rob Zombie is kind of weird, so that's sort of inevitable.
Right.
But
my
the main
point.
thing. Sorry, go ahead. You finish yours and I'll.
Right. My main thing is, more often than not, in certain horror movies, they try to give the killers, the maniacs and psychos, as you say, Leon, is the fact that they're trying to give them backstory. And sometimes they don't have to, but sometimes they do. Hello?
Hello?
Can you hear me?
Hmm?
Can you hear me now? Like,
Yes.
okay. Just what I was saying was the whole giving the backstory on people having. The thing is that sometimes people with mental illnesses do bad things. I'm not saying because they're mentally ill, they do bad things. It's one of many factors that influence them to do bad things. In these movies, is what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's just like, again, like the whole thing is you don't. What I am trying to get across is, again, Leon, you are reaching and trying to strawman the argument that it's this creating this overall stigma for every mentally ill person, and I do not agree with that.
You're essentially assuming the masses are so stupid that they can't do the basic logic that you just did, which suggests to me that you think that you're significantly better than the broad masses of Joe Public, even though even in the early days of psychological horror, at using your own examples, for example, we have movies like Psycho 2, where Norman is portrayed sympathetically, and is actually the ostensibly mentally healthy person that ends up pushing Norman over the edge because she can't get over her hysteria and hatred for him. So you may take this notion that that movies haven't always been at least a little bit sympathetic to people with mental illnesses and shove it, because you may not have caught what your brain just did there, but you say that we're getting better as a society towards treating mental illnesses correctly, but you yourself also presented the movie Psycho 2 into evidence. And given that you presented it into evidence, I'm going to use it against you. Because that, I'm not sure when Psycho 2 was released, because, quite frankly, I wasn't aware that there were Psycho sequels in first now, or when we first started covering this. But if it was anywhere close to the original release of the movie, then your hypothesis is at the very least in doubt. If a movie sympathetic to people with mental health issues is as close to Psycho, which was released in the 1960s, I don't remember exactly when, as Psycho 2 is, then on some level, someone has been aware of the plight of the mentally ill for at least that long. And probably a good deal before that, because generally speaking, we make art based on things we know on some level already. I.e., someone had to think to themselves, mentally ill people aren't all that bad, in order to make a movie in which mentally ill people are portrayed as not all that bad. Unless they did it by accident, in which case that's even more funny, to be honest. Jack-o'-lantern.
Jack-o'-lanterns.
Sharon Packer, author of Mental Illness in Popular Culture, wrote, "The introduction and evolution of the mentally ill killer appears to be a product not only of cultural and social changes of the time, but also psychological research and the public's awareness of it. The majority of the viewing public is most likely aware of, but unfamiliar with, the realities of mental illness. Like fictional portrayals, sensationalized media coverage of real-world events can influence the public's opinion of it."
Yeah, but
Psychologically speaking, there's very little evidence of that. There's very little to suggest that, for example, playing violent video games will make anyone more violent, or playing a sexist video game will make anyone more sexist, or anything like that. Now, granted, the media's approach to sensationalism in general is fucked up, regardless of the consequences of that sensationalism. The fact that they do it is fucked up. But the thing is, in the cases where a mentally ill person gets spotlighted by the media and sensationalized, it's not the mental illness that is the source of the sensationalism, for the most part. It is the actions that mental illness led the person to commit. In the case of the Unabomber, it's the fact that somebody made a series of mail bombs more sophisticated than professional bomb makers could make in the middle of a cabin in Montana or somewhere. Or in the case of, any number of terrorists, it's the act of terrorism itself that is sensationalized. It's not mental health issues. And again, especially in the modern era where diagnoses of depression, anxiety, OCD, ADHD, bipolar, etc., are more common and more noticed than ever before, that doesn't. People are unlikely to conflate. The actions of Ted Kaczynski or Timothy McVeigh with every mentally ill person ever. Now, if a person starts acting equivalent to that, if a person starts being violent or starts being extremely unstable mood-wise or extremely unreliable conduct-wise, then you might get some stigma thrown their way. But again, that stigma is mostly tied to the actions, not the disorder itself. And certainly not the fact that there is one. Jack-o'-lanterns.
Jack-o'-lanterns.
Nevertheless, Michael Myers in any incarnation is still Michael Myers, a mentally ill serial killer. A defensive retort to the influence Packer mentions might be, so what? Now we can never show a slasher who happens to be mentally ill? Well, mentally ill slasher antagonists are not written to be villains who happen to be mentally ill, but villains because they are mentally ill. The villainy of the film is the mental illness. This distinction helps the real-world stigma to spread.
No. Categorically not. Categorically not. As I just went over, in real life as in movies, the things that people are revolted by are the actions of the person in question. The mental health issues are at best explanatory and incidental. The very fact that these characters have mental illnesses at all is meant to fulfill an explanatory function. Why does this character act differently than every other sane human being in the world? And the collective answer, for the most part, tends to be they're insane in some way, which is better than leaving it ambiguous entirely and saying, I guess that's just human nature, because that would actually be even more nihilistic. If there was no attempt whatsoever to explain this behavior with mental illness, and they just assumed that this was default human nature, that would be a very dark approach to human nature, if nothing else. And again, usually in the cases where mental illness is evoked as an explainer, it's to either explain why the character doesn't have full control over their act, explain why the traumas or tribulations the character has suffered, or if nothing else, simply to explain how they are different from other people with mental health. It's not the mental health disorder that is the source of villainy, Leon. It is the actions, and the mental health issues are at best explanatory and incidental to that. The fact that you think that everyone else thinks the mental health issue is the source of villainy suggests to me that you think way too far in abstraction. You can't. It suggests to me that you have trouble differentiating between the causes of actions and the actions themselves, which is kind of frightening, given that you also seem to believe that you're better than everyone for assuming the exact opposite thing. Please, for the love of God, have more empathy for your fellow man, Leon. If you personally are intelligent enough to understand the reasons why a Michael Myers, a Jason Voorhees, or Norman Bates are not synonymous with everyone with mental health disorders, then why do you not give people other than you the benefit of the doubt in the same way? Why do you not assume that Joe Public understands that? And why do you assume that Joe Public would make a terrible conflation like, the mental health issue is the source of fear? Do you really think human beings are that unempathetic or that callous? Or do you simply need to believe that for the sake of your own ego? And what does that say about you relating to other human beings? If that is the case. Jack-o'-lanterns.
Jack-o'-lanterns.
A single movie is not going to change public perception of mental illness, but the cumulative effect of so many examples over so many years simply cannot be swept under the rug. Modern horror post-slasher still sometimes utilizes mental illness as the instigator of the narrative or the condition of the antagonists. A 2015 horror film, The Visit, features two children who live with two elderly people posing as their grandparents. The couple appears to have schizophrenia or something similar. The 2016 film Split and the 2019 film Glass feature an antagonist with dissociative identity disorder. The latter film even takes place in a mental institution. All three...
I cannot believe he is going there.
Well, for one thing, Split would be classified as a horror movie. Glass is more
a thriller or a superhero movie.
Yeah, a part of me wanted to say comic book, but
well, yeah, it's a superhero movie or a comic book movie.
Well, no, comic book. I always assumed comic book just meant like it's based off a comic book. Superhero is just the more general term. So I was.
Mm-hmm. But regardless, excluding Glass because it's not in the horror genre and therefore really it's inadmissible to this argument. You just said, Leon, that you assume that the characters from The Visit have schizophrenia or something like that, which suggests to me they don't actually say in the movie what mental disorder the couple suffers from. And if they don't even address it, if they don't even tie the character's behaviors to a mental health disorder, then why are you going out of your way to disproportionately do that? If the movie doesn't address it, then why are you acting as though the movie went out of its way to address it? And incidentally, the Horde or the Beast from Split winds up getting superpowers from his DID. So, if anything, I would say that's a fairly sympathetic portrayal. Any situation in which a character winds up with superpowers, generally speaking, is a sympathetic portrayal. You could make the argument of that's not realistic, and therefore that might somehow be harmful, that it's unrealistic, but given that in Glass, since you brought that up, the character with DID and the other characters who are essentially suffering from superhero delusions or superhuman delusions, as Dr. Stable puts it, are right in the end, and she is the villain, then at the very least, in regards to Split and Glass, you could make the argument that it's deliberately trying to be sympathetic toward people with mental health disorders. Hell, the Horde/Beast motto in Split and Glass is the broken are the more evolved. How exactly the hell is that not sympathetic? They're literally saying people who are psychologically broken are better than normal people. The fuck?
Well, not just psychologically broken, just the people who have gone through some shit.
Yeah, but what I mean is these are probably the two worst examples he could have pulled out of his hat.
Oh yeah, no,
to try and make this argument, because in Split, Glass, and even to some extent in Unbreakable, the people we're supposed to root for are the people with mental and or physical disorders, even when they're the villain. Like Mr. Glass is the protagonist of that entire trilogy, as far as I'm concerned, and he is literally, textually, and in his own opinion, supposed to be the villain. And yet somehow we're still more sympathetic to him than we are freaking Dr. Staple. So, of all the stupid examples you could have chosen, why did you go with the one where mental illness gives you superpowers, apparently? Oh boy.
Alright. Shall we?
Jack-o'-lanterns.
3 films were written and directed by M. Night Shyamalan, who has taken criticism for consistently portraying the mentally ill as dangerous monsters in an era in which we ought to know better. The good news is that while horror movies continue to use mental illness as the instigator of the narrative, it is no longer as confined to the loose motivation of the antagonist.
Okay.
Once again, for those apparently sitting in the back, at the very least in Unbreakable, Split, and Glass, in what I personally think is M. Night Shyamalan's best series of movies, they are not negative portrayals. Yes, Mr. Glass is a villain, textually speaking, in his own meta-narrative, but he's also the protagonist of the trilogy, and he's correct. And in the case of Kevin, or the Horde, or the Beast, whatever you want to call him, his mental illness gives him superpowers, and he is literally a messianic figure fighting for, quote-unquote, the broken, and his entire motto is the broken are the more evolved. So you could make the argument, I'll grant you kind of with The Visit, in that they do generically have some kind of mental health issue, but in the Unbreakable trilogy, if anything, if you want to relate this to mental health issues in some way, the text of that trilogy says mental health issues make you better than normal people. So wrong. They literally could not get any more sympathetic than if they tried. Jack-o'-lantern.
Jack-o'-lanterns.
Now it is a condition of the sympathetic protagonist, or sometimes portrayed through metaphor. The 2014 film The Babadook is the story of a widow named Amelia who struggles to care for her son following her husband's passing. A common interpretation of the film is that the entity is a manifestation of Amelia's depression and even survivor's guilt. In the 2020 film Relic, a middle-aged woman begins to notice strange behavior in her mother, slowly becoming unrecognizable to her, a metaphor for cognitive changes in the elderly, such as the onset of dementia.
I haven't seen those movies.
I don't really have anything to say one way or the other here.
Yeah.
I don't really. It's not like a protagonist with mental health issues is anything new. I mean, you've got basically everyone in a
Lovecraft story?
Scorsese movie. You've got Rupert Pupkin from King of Comedy. You've got the guy from Travis Bickle from Taxi Driver. You've got Arthur Fleck Joker in Joker. Although God only knows what else in the back movie is. I almost wish he would do a Joker movie or a Joker examination video now, just so I can figure out once and for all if he would be in favor of that movie or not. Even in less like dramatic stuff, you've got people like Quentin Coldwater from The Magician. Basically, every character in The Magician, basically their traumas and their mental health issues are what give them the power of magic. So, yeah, it's not anything new, and it's certainly not uncommon or as avant-garde as his examples would suggest. And oftentimes, it takes someone who's a little bit cracked in the head to catch people who are cracked in the head. Hell, look at Thomas Harris's Red Dragon. Will Graham's superpower is that he can empathize and relate to the mental health issues of the people he's trailing down. The only person who could defeat Moriarty in the classic Sherlock Holmes stories was Holmes, because they had a similar way of thinking, a similar genius that also made them extremely antisocial and extremely schizoid. It's the old adage of fighting fire with fire, or possibly the best way of describing it in the Sherlock Holmes: A Game of Shadows was when Moriarty asked Holmes, "Oh, you think you're the only one who can play this game?" It takes someone who's mad to catch someone who's mad sometimes. Jack-o'-lanterns.
Jack-o'-lanterns.
In many of these more modern horror films, mental illness is not a boogeyman, but something that the protagonist is processing and will attempt to overcome. For example, at the end of The Babadook, Amelia locks away her grief, the entity, but does not annihilate it. She learns to live with it and be in control of her own destiny, the master of her own life. This grief will not consume her and will not harm her son. In Relic, even after the elderly woman becomes inhuman, her daughter and granddaughter decide to stay with her and care for her. She is not a monster, she is simply different from who she once was.
Okay. I don't really see how this relates to the Maniacs and Psychos thing.
He's making the argument that our approach to mental health issues has gotten better as a society over time.
No fucking shit.
Because of course his his scope and his lens is entirely on societal level. He can't think in the internal logic of any of his individual examples. He has to balloon it out and extrapolate it out to some broader psychological narrative. And also, something, history always moves in a positive direction because reasons.
Mm.
Which is completely fucked in the head. But never mind.
Okay.
It's just more, honestly, it's just more elitism because it's essentially saying the people in the past were essentially not human because they couldn't think of the things that I can think of. And that's dumb. Human beings have been the same for essentially the last 10,000 years. We have not really psychologically changed all that much. In fact, a large part of the source of our problems as a society are the fact that we're psychologically wired to exist in the Stone Age or in medieval feudalism, and we don't live that way anymore. We live in massive metropolitan civilizations.
Mm. Okay. So we got about 46 seconds.
All right, jack-o'-lanterns.
Jack-o'-lanterns.
These more sympathetic portrayals of mental illness are a great relief after decades of stigmatization by the horror genre. None of this is meant to make anyone feel guilty for watching or enjoying these portrayals, and none of this is some condemnation of the genre in general. This is only meant to highlight this pattern, to call attention to it, and to help stop us from internalizing it.
Fuck
Okay.
you.
Agreed. So much fuck you. It infinitely cascading fractal of fuck you. But, number one, you have not demonstrated that stigmatization even exists. Your defense of the idea of that stigmatization fails on every level. The examples that you provided do not prove your case that this even exists or was a problem to begin with. And a lot of your suppositions are based on faulty logic. So, far from making a case as to why we shouldn't internalize this stigmatization, you haven't even proved that such stigmatization exists to begin with, let alone that it's a problem that needs to be solved. You skipped over two of the most important aspects of philosophy. Number one, you define your terms. Number two, you demonstrate that your terms are valid. And number three, and only then do you proceed with, given that X is true, what do we do about X? You skip over those very important beginning steps of figuring out whether X is even a thing. And if this is your best case scenario, if this is your best argument, Leon, then I remain unconvinced that this stigmatization was ever a thing. Because you strawmanned the horror genre, you strawmanned people's reactions to the horror genre, you strawmanned human nature, you strawmanned history, and you are currently strawmanning modern human nature as well. So yeah, I award you no points. May God have mercy on your soul. Fuck off.
Okay, so I think we're gonna have to cut the short film review, but other than that, we should be good.
Okay. So are we moving to the creepypasta then, or are we moving to Mr. Brado review?
Creepypasta. I am trying to get something set up first. Second. Yeah, this. So yeah, folks, our next thing is basically we're going to be listening to a creepypasta, reviewing it, and also discussing creepypasta as a whole. It's kind of our whole dealio for this one.
Yeah. And also shout out to the channel Nature's Tempter, who does really, really excellent readings of creepypastas and internet stories. For anyone that if creepypastas and internet stories are your thing, check out Nature's Tempter. The man has a voice like I've never heard before. Like if I had my way and they ever did a Sandman animated show or whatever, this guy would be the guy I would ask to do the voice of Bree in my version of Sandman.
Right. Okay. Also, if you want to listen to this and check out his channel, we have a link to the video down below in the description.
Mm-hmm.
Just feel like that need to be said. Okay, so I have the video pulled up. All right, so yeah, so this video is I'm a demon and I need your help. It is 5 minutes long, but knowing us, so shall we jack o' lantern?
I don't know how much commentary there will be on this one. It's a pretty short and sweet one.
Yeah. All right, shall we?
Mm-hmm.
Jack o' lantern.
Jack o' lantern.
I'm a demon and I need your help. My life is strange, me too. I'm a monster. I don't mean in the sense that I'm a terrible person or anything like that. I mean it in the sense that I'm a monstrous hell creature that feeds off human fear and misery. You may be wondering why I'm writing this to you. It's because I need your help. I'll get to the specifics in a moment, but first I'd like to explain why I need your help at all. About 1600 years ago, some practitioners of black magic discovered an ancient Latin textbook and summoned me to this plane of existence to do their bidding.
That was 40 seconds instead of 20.
Well, crap.
Well, no, I'm not really showing the video itself. I'm more playing the audio over a piece of a picture I have.
Okay, so maybe we won't get DMCA'd for content reasons or something, and maybe we will. Who knows? I don't really know how the algorithm works in this day and age, other than the 20-second rule, generally speaking.
I like his voice.
He has a really great voice for this.
Yeah. I mean, it's obviously like edited and like filtered, but it's still good. Like there's just a lot of personality and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I got nothing. I got nothing else.
One thing. This is just me nitpicking like a motherfucker because this is my sort of area of expertise. But assuming that this video was, or this creepypasta was from like the mid to like the 2010 or the 2000s, that would mean that these hypothetical black magicians would have existed in 400, and I'm not entirely sure if Latin was the default language for Europe at the time of around 400 AD. I might be mistaken. It might have been, well, I guess no, because the Romans. So yeah, fine, ancient Latin textbook around the year 400, whatever. Sorry, just wanted to make sure that tracked with what we know of actual history for a second.
Jack-o'-lanterns?
Jack-o'-lanterns.
Only one of the warlocks, Adriel I think his name was, messed up the ritual so that I was no longer bound to do their will. Apparently, they wanted me to enact an apocalypse that would destroy the current world order and set them up as leaders. I decided that was a bit much, so I slaughtered them all instead. I might have enacted the apocalypse anyway, but Adriel's screw-up caused me to be summoned with only a tiny fraction of my power. Even so, I left Adriel alive, mostly because he seemed like a good lad. He went on to become a baker later on, if I recall correctly. I burned the summoning scroll and went back to my plane of existence, where I had been tormented.
I kind of love the idea that like the demon's just sort of like, I slaughtered everyone in relation to you, but yeah, you're okay. Go on and open up that bakery, you crazy kid. I enjoy just that possible reaction from the demon. But I have serious questions about what this ritual is and how exactly you could fuck it up so badly. Because like you could hypothetically screw up the binding just by not including the appropriate circles, which generally speaking, when you're summoning anything, has to fucking circle, kid. That's like ritual magic 101. But I don't know how the hell he possibly could have screwed it up so that the creature would be summoned in the first place, but without their power or without the majority of their power. Like, that must have been a pretty unique screw up to have that be the result. If this were the modern era, I feel like, or if this took place in the modern era, I feel like Ezreal is the magical equivalent of those guys on America's Funniest Home Videos who just randomly like wreck things horribly for no reason other than their own stupidity.
Right. Jack-o'-lanterns?
Jack-o'-lanterns.
Jack-o'-lanterns.
Hunting lost souls with my kids. However, it seems like I should have killed Adriel after all, because unbeknownst to me, he had transcribed the summoning ritual and bequeathed it to his children after he died. The scroll was lost for centuries, until one of Adriel's modern descendants discovered it in his great-grandfather's attic while preparing for an after-death estate sale. He decided to get it translated out of curiosity, and afterwards he decided that the contents would make a great creepypasta. He even included the original Latin incantation for flavor. This was a few years ago, when that fad of ritualistic stories had still been blooming.
Okay, so this was published, like the video itself was published in 2017, or near the end of it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So if he says some years, I'd assume maybe, I assume creepypasta took off around 2007, 2008. Because I think it's been around longer than the 2010s.
Yeah.
But not long enough in the 2000s to really be, because I'd say late 2000s, early 2010s.
Yeah, I don't know, but I do know that at least 2 or 3 of these that he's done have been by that same person. Life is Strange too. So whoever Life is Strange Me Too is or was, apparently they've written like 3 or 4 pretty decent creepypastas.
Yeah, they've written more, but yeah. All right, Joey. Jack-o'-lanterns.
Jack-o'-lanterns.
To my great surprise and distress, my summoning instructions became somewhat popular. At this point, I hadn't been to Earth in over 1,000 years, and I had been summoned by the most powerful dark wizards. Now, every few days I was being whisked out of hell by some drunk teenagers shining lights up at their face in the bathroom trying to scare each other. You see,
Oh, I feel so sorry for this demon. I mean, he's a demon, but I know what it's like to be dragged into stupidity. So
Yeah, I'm just curious, who or what is the name or designation of this demon, because I can't imagine a powerful demon just went unsummoned for 1,000 years unless they're extremely uncommon. But pro tip for the day right here, guys: if a ritual requires electric appliances, that's your main giveaway that it's bullshit, so that somebody's just making shit up. Because I don't know if anyone knows this or not, but electricity wasn't that common back when they were writing ancient spell books. So yeah, generally speaking, if a ritual requires electrical bullshit, they're bullshit.
that depends, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would assume most summoning rituals wouldn't require electricity.
I've never seen one that did. I've seen certain books that say you can substitute candles for electrical candles, but that's about it, and that's really, really modern new agey stuff.
Okay.
Or chaos magic, because chaos magic is essentially freewheeling. There's no rules, which annoys the shit out of me, but that's a different story. Jack-o'-lanterns.
Jack-o'-lanterns.
You see, a long time ago, when literacy was exceptionally rare, my summoning ritual was extremely complicated. But in the days of blooming literacy, rates in Google Translate, it's become absurdly easy. Luckily for me, though, Adriel didn't just fuck up when he summoned me. He fucked up when he transcribed the ritual as well, so that I'm not bound to anyone's will when I get summoned. This is a good thing, because drunk human teenagers usually ask me to do some pretty weird stuff. However, I still only get summoned with
Okay, so I'm honestly curious what the fuck those people are asking him. Mainly on the fact that it's a demon that's saying it's pretty weird stuff.
Yeah, if a demon who's been tormenting souls for the last 1,000 years is looking at your request and going, "That's stupid and weird. What the fuck are you asking?"
Well, also, you also have to mention, he tortured souls with his kids. He mentioned that.
Yes, apparently he has kids.
So, I'm just saying, it's... What the... I'm honestly terrified to ask what the fuck people were asking him to do, if he considered it so weird.
And again, this part is extremely funny, primarily because we all know how stupid teenagers can be.
I was one recently. Well,
Yeah.
relatively 2 years.
Yeah. And I know the kind of people who go through a Ouija board phase or a let's do rituals from creepypasta phase.
Oh, hell no. Hell no.
Yeah. And they're all stupid. Every single one of them. generally speaking, if you're stupid enough to get a spell off of Google, you're a dumbass. And your spell's probably not going to work, and if it works, you're going to ruin yourself, basically. That's the general rule.
Just for the record, I'm the ethnic guy in my group of friends, mostly.
Mm-hmm.
If I do it, if I ever get involved in supernatural stuff, according to horror movie rules, I'm dying first.
Well, probably not you, because you'd be smart enough to call the, resident occult expert that you happen to have on speed dial before the second act of the equivalent horror movie.
Well, that, and also, I'm not dumb enough to be caught in the situation that most horror movie people find themselves in.
Yeah. If you saw a box that said "Do not touch" on it, you wouldn't touch it.
Well, I would look to see what's inside, but otherwise, no.
And then we'd be plunged into 1,000 years of darkness, and would be different.
Well, it depends on the box. Like, if it's just a cardboard box, then I might just...
If it's a box containing something supernatural, then I guess you'd be fine. But if the box itself were the supernatural thing, like Pandora's box or some shit.
Well, honestly, I'm dumping that thing like in a river or something.
Mm-hmm. Although interestingly enough, the word in Greek for that's actually used for Pandora's box in the actual mythology is pithos, which is slightly more accurately translated to jar, urn, or vase. So Pandora's box probably wasn't a box. It was probably more like a vase or an urn.
Neat.
Yeah.
Okay. Hello? Hello?
Right.
Okay. I cut out?
Okay. Back to the thing.
Yeah. Jack-o'-lantern.
A tiny fraction of my full power. So I usually just terrify them to their very core before whisking back to hell so that they won't bother me again. That was until Lucy. Last month, some 6-year-old girl found my creepypasta summoning ritual and decided to try it out. By chance, she got the ending right. I suppose it was bound to happen eventually. It was only a small mistake that Adriel made in the transcription after all. The problem is that she's not actually evil in any sense of the word. She's managed to summon a demon capable of bringing about the apocalypse. She has me do things like materialize cotton candy and puppies out of thin air. Her parents are always flabbergasted when they arrive to pick her up from school and she's surrounded by at least 8 puppies. At this point, I don't even care about destroying humans and feasting on their souls anymore.
Again, I feel so bad for the demon, even though he's a demon.
Like, I mean, I've heard the phrase sympathy for the devil, but good goddamn.
Like, a being of darkness being forced to do that stuff has to be, like, soul-crushing for him.
It's just like, hello, omnipowerful demon of the abyss. I'd like you to create world peace and solve world hunger, please. Bye.
I think that's even out of the possibility of a demon, of a very powerful demon.
Well, I mean, it depends on...
Practically, I mean...
It depends on the power of the demon and the nature of how they're summoned and all sorts of other shit, but yeah. Probably. In actuality, yeah, probably.
But yeah, again, I got nothing really to say. Jack-o'-lanterns?
Jack-o'-lanterns.
I'd really just like to go back home. So I'm asking for your help. I need someone here to complete my banishing ritual so I can go back to hell and live in peace. It's actually quite simple. You just draw a pentagram on a mirror, light 7 candles, and read the following words: Daemonum Magister ab Antiqua. Dono tibae mea corpus gratia liberabo vos, ego vivere invite vos intra corpus mea, ego immolo anima mea, nos fane humane creature, nos appetimus mortis et infernos producat in fine hominis. Amen. So if anyone could help me out.
But
I see what it did. That's funny.
actually, there is a translation here in the comments.
Yeah.
You understood it, didn't you?
Well, for one thing, I've watched this creepypasta a few times before, and I looked at the translation in the comments as well. But yeah, I understood enough of it the first time I watched it to think, there's something wrong here. And
I'm
the short version, that's no banishing ritual. That is a summoning, and it's a possessive summoning. Because it literally involves asking the demon to take hold of your body and to use your body as its vessel. So yeah, fuck that shit.
well, he is a demon, so
Well, I mean, yeah, demons got a demon, but still.
yeah. Okay, so yeah, that was that creepypasta. I will say, when we first thought about having creepypasta and like discussing it on the podcast, I legitimately thought of like the mainstays, the classics like Slenderman, Jeff the Killer, Eyeless Jack, Tiki Toby, those kind of guys.
I think probably the oldest creepypasta thing is probably like Bloody Mary.
Really? Huh. That is interesting.
Yeah.
But I'm sure you get my point. Is that creepypasta is very much kind of like the Penny Dreadfuls or the
yeah. It's kind of a modern. It's the internet's way of creating its own folklore, its own campfire stories, and I kind of like that a lot of these creepypastas, they have an older quality to them. Like they seem like something that you might hear from the story around a campfire or an old piece of folklore. It's not self-referential. It's not stories that could only be told on the internet. It's essentially reviving the old oral traditions, kind of.
Yeah.
To the point that I'm almost sure that some of these might even be based on old folklore.
Yeah. And it's just so interesting because there's such a variety of them that you're just enwrapped by. You could find no two are alike at all.
No. Nope.
Even if they're about the same thing,
Yeah.
Which is pretty amazing. And also the creativity that goes behind each one is respectable.
Mm-hmm.
And downright.
I mean, there's something about human beings that loves stories and storytelling, and there's something about human beings that needs there to be something more to the universe. There needs to be something supernatural. So, no matter what newfangled tech humans come up with, at least someone somewhere on that new platform is going to use it to play with that aspect of human psychology.
Mm-hmm.
It's why there will always be cryptids. There will always be folk tales, urban legends.
Yeah, I would say most creepypastas, especially like the ones you and I watched recently, in terms of like trying to come up with one to discuss,
Mhm.
are kind of better than most modern horror movies.
Yeah, and isn't that sad?
No, actually, I wouldn't say that because I think, if anything, creepypastas, like those, the stories written in them, could make very excellent movies if handled right.
Yeah, I could definitely see this one, the one we just finished, even being like a comedic short on something like the Twilight Zone. It actually kind of reminds me of an old episode of the '80s Twilight Zone, where a mathematician accidentally summons up a demon while he's doing math, and he says something along the lines of "I'd sell my soul to get this equation right," and it's the episode involves him, the demon, just shooting the shit, while he tries to figure out how to get out of the bargain that he accidentally made. And there's a little bit of that humor, I think, in this.
Yeah. I just, and I mean, I know there's been the Slender Man movie that came out that was god awful.
Holy rude.
Yeah.
So very, very bad.
Yeah, but again, I think that mainly chops up to execution, because the concepts of these like folkloric creatures of creepypastas of the internet
Mhm.
are very much intriguing and just, I mean, they wouldn't have gotten so popular if they didn't grab the attention of so many people.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest mistakes that horror movies based on creepypastas and stuff like that make is they make the internet too important to the IP. Because the truly awesome thing about creepypastas, whether it's just generic ones like this and stuff that Nature's Templar would cover, or if it's an ongoing creative project like the SCP Foundation, even though the internet is how the story is told and how the stuff becomes popular, the actual content of the material is timeless and in most cases actually kind of old-fashioned. Because, like I said, a lot of them resemble old school folklore or campfire stories,
Right.
and a lot of the SCP stuff has a kind of turn of the last century Victorian quality to it, and most of the lore behind it also dates back at least that far. So,
Right.
I think if you want my advice, Hollywood, God knows you never listen to me, but I'll give you some advice, Hollywood, free of charge. Stop making movies like Unfriended. Stop making movies where a computer is necessary for the scare when you're making shit like that. Treat it like you would treat a Bigfoot movie or a Loch Ness Monster movie or something out of folklore. And if you do that and you treat it like you would treat any of those stories, any of those urban legends, you'll probably end up with much better results. Also, don't rely so much on jump scares, but that was advice I would give you anyway.
Right. Yeah, and like I said, I honestly think creepypasta has kind of become the modern horror.
Yeah, it's definitely where horror is going.
Yeah, in terms of evolution of the genre.
Yeah, and much like the horror of yesteryear, I really like the creepypastas that honestly have a little bit of a playful or even sweet and nice aspect to them. Like even in something like the SCP universe, you still have entries like SCP-999 or Where the Dragons Went or The Adventures of Lord Blackwood. So yeah, just because it's horror doesn't mean it always has to have the downer end.
Yeah, and again, the creativity with each story is always it's just refreshing.
Yep. And I think one of the reasons why these are so successful is because on some level humans need those kind of stories. And up until creepypasta was able to be a thing, we had kind of forgotten about those. We had forgotten that impulse. And I think there is something wrong with us forgetting that impulse. So if nothing else, creepypasta is a perfect example of why we need to keep Halloween around. Whether you believe in the supernatural or not, whether you believe in any of the traditions or not, we need some outlet for the part of our psyche that desires that dark and darkly funny and darkly benevolent impulse for storytelling.
Yeah.
Because the world is stranger than we would ever imagine, and I think most of us like it that way on some level. So much so that we would even make up shit to fill the void when things are looking too mundane.
Right. All right. So, do we have anything else or any closing statements about creepypasta, or shall we move on to our last topic of the night?
Just again, people who are good at making creepypastas, people that are good at creating this modern folklore that we have, keep doing what you do. You're doing a good thing, and you're making people happy through the process.
I think I tried to write one once when I was like in middle school or something.
That doesn't surprise me, honestly.
Yeah, well, I wrote it on paper, actually. Never published or anything. It was just like, I think I was trying to go for like a Lovecraft story, but I scrapped it because it wasn't that good.
It's a lot easier to make Lovecraft fan fiction than it is to approach the level of actual Lovecraftian shit. Lovecraft is hard to do. That's why only one person was really solidly able to do it.
Right. Well, the thing had to do with basically a thing in the mirror. And that was pretty much it. Like, it was like I said, it was kind of, now looking back, it was really like kind of just a stupid thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I kind of didn't really try to expound on it, so I just kind of scrapped it. Yeah. All right, so yeah, creepypasta. Again, like, I think it's kind of the future of actually good horror.
Yeah.
And I really wish there would be. I honestly kind of wish Blumhouse would start dabbling a little bit into creepypastas, and
yeah, so somebody just give all the creepypastas to Jason Blum, because honestly, I know I'm not gonna make any friends with this one, but Jason Blum and his associates are the only people making good horror movies anymore. Like, they're not like, not every Blumhouse movie is good, but they at least try to be. And whenever there is a good horror movie, it's almost invariably Blumhouse.
Plus, the guy who did Aquaman worked for Blumhouse for a long time.
Yeah, he was the main guy behind The Conjuring.
Yes, I believe so.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, keep doing what you do, And same to the writers and shit behind SCP, because quite frankly, I love the SCP Foundation. It is probably my favorite, like, weird internet subcultural thing.
Yeah. All right.
So I need more of that in my life. Make more,
Right.
as much as possible.
Okay, so our final one is our final topic of the night is a review of the 3 seasons of the Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. Also, fun fact: recently they have renewed it for a 4th season, and it will be coming out December 31st.
Yeah. We'll probably throw the trailer for that in next week.
Well, it was just a promo, and it was kind of just using like the original. It was like using other stuff, I think.
Oh, they didn't have any new footage yet.
I don't know.
I'll have to watch it.
Yeah, I'll send it. I'll send it to you, and maybe we'll look up some articles as well. But yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Cool.
So yeah, over the month I've been binge watching it because up until we decided to do this topic, I hadn't really cared much for Sabrina, like the Chilling Adventures of Sabrina.
Mhm.
It never really stood out to me or like grabbed my attention much.
Mhm.
My and just my general thoughts, and I'll let Dalton have his general thoughts as well. It's meh to me. You know, it's meh. It's not that good. It's not really bad. It's just, you know, it's in the middle, and that tends to be a lot of stuff these days. So
Yeah. I, on the other hand, just giving my background with like Sabrina as an IP. I, like a lot of people my age, I would imagine grew up with the ABC sitcom Sabrina the Teenage Witch and the animated version of that, and later I found out that it was actually in the Archie Comics universe. Funnily enough, though, when I first saw it advertised on Netflix before it premiered, I didn't know that it was a reimagining of Archie Sabrina. I just thought the character happened to be named Sabrina, but then I watched the first episode, and I heard her name was Sabrina Spellman, and that she was a witch, and that her aunts were named Helga and Zelda, and I'm just like, you cheeky bastard, you did a new version of Sabrina, didn't you? And yeah, so it was good but flawed is my opinion of the new one. I will say I like new Sabrina. I like Chilling Adventures of Sabrina a lot more than the cheesy 90s version. The new Sabrina just embraces the original aesthetic of the comics a lot more, and also it has kind of this weird pulpy quality to it, almost like Addams Family or Tales from the Crypt a little bit. And I do sort of like them taking witchiness a little bit more seriously in this one, because generally speaking, I like when magic is respectable in general. Not sure how I feel about it being the medieval style satanic variety of witchcraft. I feel like they could have done a more serious rendition of Sabrina without it needing all the dark lords and Satanists and go to heaven crap. But at the very least, it's ironically funny, like I said, in the vein of like The Munsters or The Addams Family. And I love me some Addams Family, so Sabrina by way of The Addams Family isn't a bad thing necessarily.
mm-hmm.
Plus, it's a little edgy, and that's cool, I guess. I could have done without the forced feminism, but I could say that about literally anything. Anyway, back to Brainstormer's thoughts, because I've actually been watching Chilling Adventures of Sabrina since it premiered, and some of the earliest videos on my channel were Mystic Vlogs reviews I did of some Sabrina episodes. So if you want my extended thoughts in a less rambling way, go there.
Yeah. From a technical viewpoint and filmmaking, it's good. Like, it looks good. It's like the sets are amazing. It feels like a lived-in, breathed-in world.
Yeah, it brings to mind like 1950s, 1960s B horror movie aesthetic.
I will say the time period seems weird to me. Like it.
Yeah, because they have cell phones and shit.
Well, it's not that. I get that. I get they're supposed to be timeless, but more often than, and I guess you could like make the argument that it's like a small town of sorts.
Mm-hmm.
But it feels like certain plot points and stories kind of seem forced, and like the setting, it's timeless, and I like that. Like it kind of reminds me of like Gotham and stuff.
Yeah.
But like I said, certain stories and plot points don't really seem like they work in the modern setting that they kind of have or allude to. And so it's kind of.
I feel like a lot of those problems with Sabrina could have been resolved by setting it actually in the 1960s when the original Archie comics were set, because that there is a little bit of a aesthetic clash whenever they're in this very 1950s looking town with very 1950s, 1960s looking hairstyles and shit, and then all of a sudden somebody will pull out a cell phone and text shit, and
again,
they'll be talking about intersectionality and the patriarchy and women's liberation and shit.
See, I somewhat disagree. Like, I'm fine with the. Like, again, I'm fine with the timelessness. It's just I feel like it had to have a more balance of it, which I don't think was really it. I think they tried too hard to have it look like 1960s small rural town.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I get what they were going for. It didn't.
Their writing didn't match their aesthetics or their like world building.
Yeah, it was just clashing too much. They noticed it too much, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And that actually, incidentally, was my main problem with the forced politics from time to time. It wasn't just that it was, patriarchy theory, which I don't believe in, and women's oppression, which I don't believe in, and so on and so forth. It wasn't just the content of the politics; it's that it was very evidently modernized politics, and it kept jarring me out of the mood and the atmosphere, because I don't know if anyone who writes Chilling Adventures of Sabrina has talked to teenagers lately, but teenagers, even like social justice-y ones, don't talk like that.
I mean, maybe it's just me. I didn't really notice that much. It became evident in certain scenes, obviously, but the way they talk to each other seemed normal to me. That's because I'm always like the outsider, and my friends have always been like the outsiders, so we don't really talk like the mainstream popular kids or anything. But
Mine too, and
But-
by that standard, I didn't really have a problem with it either. I'm just saying,
I understand what you're saying though. Like there are certain moments where it's like eye rolling and like, why is this written that way?
yeah, like, and again, a lot of this probably could have been resolved by setting it actually in the '60s where it belongs, because back in the '60s and back in the '50s and so forth, there was more overt resistance. There was more overt, not necessarily misogyny, because I don't really necessarily believe that misogyny is a thing, but there was more of a paternalistic aspect to the way men viewed women and the way women viewed each other.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, I feel like the SJW stuff's kind of just the top layer of it.
yeah, and honestly, I like to interpret the SJW stuff as the characters saying it, not the world or the show trying to force it.
Yeah,
Because-
that's too, and I also that kind of made me turn off a little bit to certain characters when it was really just that about them.
Yeah. But yeah, the reason why it worked a little bit better here than it does in other shows, and that is specifically because half the cast are literal, like, medieval style Malleus Maleficarum devil worshippers.
Mhm.
So when they go off about my patriarchy and my women's oppression and so forth, you can, if you want to, choose to interpret that as just another way in which they're evil and stupid because of the devil worshipping. Like,
Speaking,
Their literal morality is just invert everything that Judeo-Christianity says. So
right. So
why wouldn't they believe in social justice?
speaking of which, and I know this was an issue with you, Dawn.
Mhm.
Witches and mortals. Now we're getting into like more.
Uh,
We're getting more into the story aspects.
I'm well aware that this is the standard thing for the Sabrina franchise. Sabrina as a franchise has always done this, referred to non-witches as mortals.
Well, yeah, no,
And-
I'm fine with that. It's more of my issue is they treat it as like they're both separate species.
Yeah, there's that. But here's the thing. It wasn't original to Sabrina either. They stole it from Bewitched, which is a really cheesy, fun TV show from the '60s. So of course that's where they got it from. But number one, witches can be killed in this universe, so why are they not referred to as mortals? Number two, witches in this universe apparently draw their power from making a deal with the devil. So, are they mortals up until they make the deal? Are they born with it and then it goes away if they fuck off? Or it's confusing and annoying, and particularly with characters like Daniel Webster in season 1, episode 3. They refer to him specifically as an occultist, and he mentions signing his name in a book as well, but then he stops he like the entire scene just stops, and then he says, "But not that book," and it's like, why not just make him a witch as per the show's definition who chose it? Why is it genetic? Why is there a genetic component to this shit? And yes, I'm aware blood magic is a thing. Like natural predisposition and family lineage and shit are things in magic. But that doesn't prevent someone from working their ass off and getting good at it. Especially when you consider later on characters like the voodoo priestess that Prudence and Ambrose go to in New Orleans. She calls herself a witch, but we find out later that she doesn't draw power from the pagan gods or the Dark Lord, but she draws it from somewhere else. implying that a just generic occultist can actually wield magical power. In which case, if being a witch is genetic, then what makes them so special? If your average mortal person can wield magic as it should be, and witches, I guess, are just naturally just predisposed to it, maybe? Question mark. And also, the immortality of the alleged immortality of witches kind of makes a timeline issue, because Sabrina, we see her in the pilot episode taking her dark baptism, and she's 16. Ambrose makes reference to having worked with a young Aleister Crowley when he was like in his prime, which would have been like 1890, and he bought convenience drops a couple of times that he's been on house arrest for more than a century. So it becomes a question of how extended do the witches' lifespans become because of their deal, and how exactly the fuck does no one notice that then? Like, if the witches of Greendale have lived in Greendale for their whole lives, then how does no one go, wait, why is Zelda still alive? She should be, old and gray and dead and shit, because she's been here for like 3 centuries. And how old was Edward, Sabrina's dad, when she when she was conceived? Was he several centuries old too, or what's the situation here? Like Ryla, who shows up in the Winter Solstice special, is from ancient German folklore. Has she been around all that time, or is she?
Well, I assume with that one is since she became a she's a folklore. I assume she kind of ascended in a way and became somewhat of like either a demigod or not a demigod, but not a god, but some type of spirit of sort.
You would think, that they sort of keep it ambiguous, and also, why are all of the witches relevant to the story so close to Greendale all the time? Like, because again, Ryla is from German folklore.
Again, and again, I kind of assume it's somewhat of again, like it's like a Saint Nick thing, they kind of appear when they need to appear in certain places.
I guess so, kind of, and yeah, but
I'm just
at the very least, I will give Chilling Adventures Sabrina credit for this. They do eventually mention that there are forces of power other than either the Christian God or the devil. It's not just a one or the other dichotomy. There are other forces of power, whether it be pagan deities or Hecate or what have you. And again, they sort of imply that the voodoo priestess is just a regular occultist with a tremendous amount of actual power. Fine.
Wait, so since you brought up, devil and God,
mm-hmm.
I feel like we gotta talk about the whole religious thing in terms of like the Church of Night and stuff, because we had a conversation about that a while back.
Mm-hmm.
Like just the confusing aspect of it and like the contradictions of it.
Yeah.
Okay, because I don't know, like lore wise, it kind of struck me as odd. Because in the second episode of the first season, where Sabrina's asking the questions about it and stuff, and like you did tell me that actual Satanism is about like about freedom and stuff like that.
Yeah, okay. The short version of Satanism, for those that don't know, is Satanism is actually, for the most part, atheistic. They don't believe in the devil as a being. They believe in the devil as a archetype to aspire to, like a Jungian archetype. And the aspect of the devil that Satanists tend to like is the idea of the cosmic rebel, the guy who rebelled for his own reasons, for his own sake, against, the big cosmic authority figure. And they kind of tie their concept of the devil with characters like Prometheus from Greek mythology, or trickster gods like Anazi from African folklore. So basically, it's the willful, individualistic trickster archetype that they like. The fuck this, I'm gonna rebel and I'm not gonna take this anymore aspect. And most of atheistic Satanism is very much about individual liberty, individual, just libertarianism in general. So I thought that at first, when I watched the second episode of season 1, that they were going with something like that with the Sabrina universe. I thought maybe they were going to try to go kind of the Lucifer route of the devil was misunderstood, or the devil's not such a bad guy. And then, of course, we find out that was Blackwood completely bullshitting her, which, honestly, Blackwood, you're a moron.
Right. I'm sorry. Please finish.
Yeah. But short version, I already did this rant once when I reviewed the second episode of my channel, but Blackwood, if you sold her on freedom and you sold her on individualism and all that shit, the shit that the actual atheistic Satanists believe in, why don't you continue that lie until after she signs her name? Because after she signs her name, it's not going to matter. So make up some bullshit vows that fall in line with your selling her on it, and then after you got the signature, then you basically pull a bad lawyer trick and go check the fine print, and then of course he checks the fine print and says your soul is forever needed in perpetuity to the Dark Lord and yada yada yada. But he goes from selling her on basically a version of the atheistic Satanist values of libertarian rebellion and shit, and then when it gets time for her to take her vows, he just goes, you will submit and you will submit and you will submit, and it's like, no wonder she completely changed her mind. You can't do a heel turn until after the ink is dry, Blackwood. This is lawyering 101. Get
Right.
the mark to sign the contract first, then change the rules.
Right.
If you're gonna be evil, at least be competent at it.
Okay. So what I was going to say was, when I first saw the scene and watched that, I was into the mindset that if that's true, I could understand them, and I could also get the inversion and all that stuff, right?
Mhm.
And a part of me just kind of figured that the philosophy, honestly, would just be more of, atheistic, but also, it would kind of, the more you would look into it, it'd be more of like Randian objectivism, and more the modern style, obviously, with like just pursuing hedonistic ways.
Yeah. The devil is actually the good guy and God is a prude, so fuck it, basically. That was the route I thought they were going to.
Yeah, and I thought, because here's the thing, you have to, it's interesting, it's an interesting way to go about in terms of philosophy.
Mhm.
And I
And
really
it's
wish
an
that.
interesting route to go with world building, as we see in shows like Lucifer as well. There's something at least compelling about the idea that God was the bad guy all along, and the devil might have had a point. There's something I think people can relate to with that.
I would say more both sides have their flaws.
Yeah.
Also, I just kind of picture Lucifer as more of a prick with daddy issues.
Yeah, well,
Well, that's my personal opinion on the guy, but you know.
yeah, I think the best summation of Lucifer was said by Gabriel in the supernatural episode Hammer of the Gods. Dad brought the new baby home and you couldn't handle it, so you just decided to break all his toys. That's the best way to say that.
Yeah. But you know, it's like you could make an argument, and I feel like if they had done with like Sabrina trying to find a balance between the two, maybe even meeting and talking to you know, like angel, like not like the evangelist angels, but
Yeah. But if she had called up, I don't know, Raphael, because he's supposed to be the really understanding, healing one, or even how. This is a bit of a deep cut into angel folklore on my part, but Raziel is literally supposed to be the angel of angelic magic. His name literally means the secrets of God. So that would be an interesting.
Wait. There's an angel named Raziel.
Yes.
Huh. I'm sorry. I was thinking of that video game series with the vampires. You know, Legacy of Kain.
I vaguely remember something about that.
Well, there's a character named Raziel. So.
Yeah. In like Hebrew angelology, which is of course the counterpart to demonology, Raziel is considered to be the angel that gave the magic ring to Solomon in order to bind jinn or demons, depending on the version of the story, and also wrote a book that teaches him all the secrets of the heavens. It's referred to as the Book of Raziel, and several grimoires over the years have been attributed to, or have been falsely attributed as Raziel.
So yeah, honestly, I feel like an interesting way to go with the Chilling of Princess Sabrina would have been more following along a theme of faith.
That could work, yeah.
Because you have a witch who starts off as a satanic. Well, I say satanic, but satanic adjacent witch.
Yeah, a medieval style witch.
Yeah, thank you.
A witch as the
Puritans
Inquisition would define it.
Yeah. So that, and throughout her journey of trying to figure out who and what she is, she comes across other things, either deities or spirits or really anything that
other sources of power, basically.
Yeah, and faith as well.
Yeah.
Like, who knows? Maybe, I mean, you could do the thing where I think it's like kind of Kingdom of Heaven. No, not Kingdom of Heaven. Yeah, no. That movie with Orlando Bloom in it. It's like Templar Knights.
I know the movie you're talking about. Don't remember the name or anything about it.
Yeah, but there was like a theory I had seen on YouTube talking about it, where there are like a bunch of like stranger characters that talk to the main character, and people have kind of voiced it as those who claim they speak for God do not speak with God's voice, but those who are like the strangers in a crowd, ones who are of nothing, or again, like just people who are just kind of random that talk like how God would talk, like faceless people.
hmm
You know,
In other words, what if God was one of us,
yes.
just a slob like one of us?
You done?
Yeah,
Okay.
now I'm done.
But yeah, no, it's just like she could have talked with God and not know it.
Mhm.
And again, like you have Father Blackwood say that the religion that they have is supposed to be based on free will and choice.
Which again is actually reflective of the teachings of atheistic Satan. Obviously, they can't be atheistic because they literally have magical powers and shit that kind of confirm, yes, there's an entity behind this.
Right.
But
But what I'm saying is like that's a good theme to have. I don't think they really fully expounded on it at all.
no, because and here again we see the forced social justice narratives really getting in the way, because if they went the route we're describing and they kind of embraced a version of the values of atheistic Satanism, but in a world where Satan is confirmed to exist, i.e., a world where Satan was the good guy and God was
Prude.
an overly authoritarian parent, for example, and they were all about freedom and hedonism and what have you. If they went that route, where the moral values are flipped and like the devil's actually the good guy and God is actually the bad guy, that would be an interesting route to go. Or if there was some middle ground between the two of them, that would be an interesting route to go. What gets in the way of that, though, in Chilling Adventures of Sabrina's case, is they want to frame witchcraft as an act of rebellion, like a lot of social justice warriors do. In actuality, they see witchcraft as a political act. Don't get me started on that shit. But they also want a story where Sabrina has to fight the patriarchy, so they make the devil really, really patriarchal and evil and shit. So they end up in this situation where they try to have it both ways. Witchcraft is a rebellious act because it's against Christianity, but there also needs to be a satanic patriarchy for Sabrina to topple, otherwise she can't be a protagonist. And it gets in the way. If they could see beyond the social justice woo for a second and not worry about this whole oppressing and oppressed story, they could have told a really kick-ass story about actually being transgressive and actually being libertarian and iconoclastic, but the social justice narrative just got in the way. We need the devil to be a patriarch, so even though we want witchcraft to be a transgressive act, it also needs to have a evil patriarch at the head of it.
I thought of something like a story thing.
Mm-hmm.
So technically, Sabrina's supposed to be the Antichrist, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, in terms of Judeo-Christian mythology, she's supposed to be the Antichrist.
Yeah.
What if we were to bring in the actual Jesus Christ?
Mm-hmm.
And they meet. And I'm talking like a Jesus Christ that looks like the same age as Sabrina.
Yeah. Like the Antichrist and the second coming, basically.
Yeah. And the idea is they are told that they are destined for these certain things that oppose one another. Because Jesus Christ in the
It's part of the rules.
yeah, Jesus Christ is supposed to be basically saving humanity, while Sabrina is supposed to
Be dooming. Yeah.
yeah. And what if both decide not to do either, but find their own path together? While by Destiny's will or Destiny's orders, they are supposed to be bitter enemies.
Mhm.
But they decide to be friends and allies against those that have charged them with their task.
I have an interesting twist on this. We know that Harvey comes from a family of witch hunters.
Mm-hmm.
So what if Harvey, in our hypothetical rewritten version of this, is the second coming? Because it kind of makes sense. I mean, you've got Sabrina, who is part witch, part mortal, and part angel, because Lucifer was the baby daddy and shit. And then you've got Harvey, who is the spawn of a line of witch hunters, and you could even tie in those witch hunters who were also angels from season 2, and say that Harvey is descended from a line of angelic witch hunters, because they knew that their line would eventually lead to the second coming. And then you got the Antichrist and the second coming loving and wanting to be with each other. But because star-crossed lovers, they're destined to hate and revile each other, because one is angelic second coming and the other is demonic Nephilim.
But
They fight it out for the sake of their love. So basically, apocalyptic Romeo and Juliet. Apocalyptic supernatural Romeo and Juliet.
yeah, and if you want to be real cheeky with it, you could have a point where Harvey gets his hands in. Well, no, was it actually his hands, or was it?
Yeah, hands and ankles, the stigmata wounds. Yeah.
For some reason, I thought it was his wrist. I heard someone say it was his wrist that got nailed, not his hands.
Well, I mean, yeah, it was. Sorry. Now I'm gonna have to go and look that up.
I mean, generally, I think it's mainly assumed that it was his palms.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say that, just because I think that's the general consensus.
Plus, the imagery of stigmata is generally like one wound on each palm and then one wound on each ankle.
Though I think with the version we were talking about, we kind of had to change a few things, because the whole thing about Sabrina like being the Antichrist, like with the first season and like the second season, a little bit of the second season too, is she's doing inverted things.
Yeah, she's, as Lilith put it, profaning the miracles of the Nazarene.
Yeah.
And I actually while you were saying that, I figured out an interesting way of beginning to set this up. Remember in the episode where Harvey ends up having to shoot Tommy because she botched the resurrection like a dumbass?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's also because of Lilith, but...
Well, yeah, but what if after that he wills Tommy back to life, and this time it works as a proper resurrection?
But his soul...
And that's the first inclination of there's something special and unique about Harvey.
But wasn't Tommy's soul destroyed?
No, it was. Well, Oh, you're right, because the thing that was in limbo ate him. But that might actually come to think of it, that might be even better for the sake of the miracle, because all of the supernaturally inclined people like Zelda and Lilith and everybody would be going, that shouldn't be possible. The dweller
You know what would actually
in
be
limbo
interesting?
freaking ate him. How did he get his soul out of the
You know what would be
dweller
interesting?
in the pit?
You know what would be interesting? Like, not only that, but also, what if there was someone in purgatory that helped Tommy and Sabrina lead out of the way more, even though Tommy's soul was still destroyed? Like somewhat of an angel or some type of angelic being, like a burning light that led them. While when Lilith tricked Sabrina, dropped the yarn.
Mm-hmm.
And it could have been like a guide sent by Harvey, or unknowingly, like a guardian angel sent by, that Harvey has with him.
Well, okay. I think I can make this a little bit smoother. Given how actively interested Hell is in seeing Sabrina do her thing, who's to say that the opposition, quote unquote, wouldn't start sending agents to represent their interests? Like, well, if you get to play this, it's kind of a play, both sides having players in the game kind of thing. Like, if Lucifer gets to send Lilith and have her basically be Sabrina's demonic fairy godmother, then Heaven gets to send an angel to make sure Harvey comes out okay.
A part of me thinks it would be because Lilith takes physical form, so you'd have to do the opposite with the angel.
You probably would.
I would assume on imagine. You know what would be interesting? Like, it's an imaginary, like for Harvey when he was younger, it would have been an imaginary friend. He would have thought it was an imaginary friend, and now the imaginary friend's coming back when Harvey needs
better.
What's up?
What if his father never had a first son? What if Tommy has been Harvey's angelic protector all along?
Again, I feel like there'd have to be a major overhaul in terms of story for it to work.
Yeah, for our version to work, but it still is a way more. It at least raises the stakes significantly.
We'll explain why he was so protective. I mean, again, obviously, like,
the dynamic of them being brothers is fine and all, but adding the aspect of maybe Tommy was an angel who took human form, and like you could even have it so that, like, at first when Tommy was protecting Harvey, it was because it was just a job, but as the years went by and they got closer and they got more an actual brotherly bond, it became less of a job and more something that he chose to do because he actually cared about Harvey.
Yeah. Okay, so we're gonna be here all night if we keep talking about this. So just our general thoughts is I don't mind this series. I think it could have been done better from our obvious talk of the last 30 minutes.
Yeah, it's good, but it's imperfect, and I'm hoping some of it will get fixed in season 4, because I actually have really high hopes for season 4 now that season 4 is actually being made again. And I did like in season 3 how they did focus on you don't have to draw power from the stereotypical medieval devil shit. It can be from various different gods, various different creatures, various different soldiers. I do hope we see Hecate actually makes an appearance, like even if it's just as a force. But I want now that they've brought in Hecate as the main source of the Coven's magic, I want to see that come into play at some point. I think it would have even maybe been more interesting if they eventually became divine witches instead of demonic ones, because in the original Sabrina comics, Sabrina and her family were a bunch of good witches, and of course they did the medieval satanic twist on it to be a little bit more serious and a little bit more edgy. But it'd be funny if Sabrina and the gang end up becoming divine witches that draw their power from angels instead of demons.
Hey, question.
Hmm.
What angel would Tommy have been in our version?
Okay.
For some reason, I'm thinking Michael. I realize that's like kind of too obvious, but think about it. Michael is, I believe, the oldest, or one of the oldest angels.
Well, let's see. Michael is the warrior. He's heaven's hitman essentially.
Oh, okay.
Gabriel is the messenger. That doesn't really work either. Uriel is the angel that generally gets called whenever heaven needs to get its hands dirty. Like if you look into the folklore, Uriel was the angel who was said to be the one that carried out the killing of all the firstborns in Egypt as per Moses' curse in Exodus.
Okay, who's an angel known to protect?
The only one I can think of off the top of my head is Raphael. So I'd have to go with Raphael just off the top of my head, but I don't know if I like that either.
Well, what about the magic one?
I don't see why he would be.
If anything, we could just make up an angel.
Yeah, we could, but I can't see Raziel becoming a stereotypical jock, and that is very much what Tommy was. He called Harvey nerd a lot and shit, so I can't see that. Maybe Michael could work, because Michael is kind of the jock angel, if there is such a thing.
Okay, I do think you always read into stereotypes too much, dude.
Well, I'm going based on what the characters are and whatnot. So,
well, I think
making the magical bookworm angel do a job that has nothing to do with magic or books, kind of.
I think
weird.
Well, maybe it's just me, but I think that would be pretty funny and ironic.
I mean, but it also kind of be a dick move to be like, oh, your skills involve spells and books, so we will put you in this job that requires neither spells nor books. So fuck you.
But
although, having thought about it for more than 5 seconds, my money would actually be on Metatron as the angel that Tommy was in angelic form, because the lore of Metatron in Jewish folklore is that he was actually human at one point. He was a guy by the name of Enoch, and when angels started to conceive children with mortal women, those angels asked Enoch to plead with God on their behalf. And God, of course, was pissed at the angels still. And that's why he sent the flood, according to the expanded canon of the Bible. Because he couldn't abide Nephilim existing. But he was so impressed with Metatron's bravery that he turned him into the Angel Metatron, and the Angel Metatron is essentially like the warrior angel that like goes into battle and shit. So I could see Metatron both because he had at one point been human, and also because like he's kind of the angel you call in apocalyptic situations.
All right.
So yeah, maybe.
Okay, so with that, folks, I want to say we want to say goodbye, adios, aloha, auf Wiedersehen, sayonara, peace, cheers, and
Shalom, na fuck off.